hello.
Hello, Jamie. How are you?
Good.
Good. I have been told from last week, that while people really enjoyed our conversation with Eric Knost, I needed to remind people that they're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast from the beginning, because we don't mention Eric until a little bit later. So Welcome to An Imperfect Leader. And also, welcome to a conversation that we had with Jenn Lowery. And so now I can say, how are you, Jamie? Stick around. You're going to hear about Jenn Lowery in a minute. This is just our preamble to that.
That's interesting. What are the number of people that said that? That's an interesting
reflection. I always
reflection.
like to think that in this case, when someone says, I enjoyed it, but I had to pause a moment just to make sure this was the conversation, because we don't say anything at the beginning about how, sometimes we do. We say, oh, what a great conversation we had with so-and-so.
Yeah.
And then we talk about other things. And then we go into the conversation.
Yeah. Dr. Jenn Lowery is who was on today. I think it's funny when you're like, we talked to. I'm like, I didn't talk to her. Oh,
all right, fine. But I talked to her, and then you get to reflect on that conversation.
When was this episode? This is also an encore.
This is our last encore. This is the 52nd episode of the year, because we do one every week. And so it's exciting because next week we will be welcoming everyone back to a new season 4. Isn't that crazy?
4.
That's wild.
That's great.
And
that's so great.
Yeah, I know. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah, I talked to her a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed talking with her, because she represents a state that is not frequently represented in large conversation around education, just because it's not a highly populated state. And then also, I really enjoyed talking to her because she was leading in a district that was growing considerably. And so that is an interesting perspective for school leaders who are having to deal with growth. Sometimes they accommodate that growth through just putting in mobile classrooms. And she was really putting to her community what kind of almost that compelling purpose of what do we want to create together. And so it was like, but from a facility standpoint. And then I just found her so moving when she talked about how the decisions she makes. Well, I don't want to run into it yet. We'll listen to the conversation and then we'll get into it. So that's a little teaser. I really want you to listen for something that she says about how she rallies those that she gets to lead around why it's important to make decisions with all kids in mind.
I'll give the listeners a hint. That's at the beginning.
That's right. You don't have to stick around too long.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. That's obviously nobody will be surprised that both you and I moved or touched by that particular section of her reflections and interview. Yeah, I thought I would actually open today with the tiny district part. Like, she's in TEA, South Dakota. This is just south of Sioux Falls. And she started 11 graduates that first year that she was superintendent. Was it 11? Is that right?
Something like that. But then now it's got 2,300 kids.
Yeah, now she has 2,300 kids. So it's grown, definitely grown. But what I'm interested in knowing is, because you guys talk a lot about systems leadership in this, and so there's another thing to listen for is how both Peter and Jenn talk about that. But what are your thoughts on how systems leadership is interpreted or how it manifests differently in small, medium, and large districts? And I was thinking about this just because you and I, in essence, have only really been in systems that are large. Or at least all my experience were in large systems. I have since, as a result of the consulting company that I run and all of the different nonprofits that I've been a part of, have been in very small districts and have partnered with small districts, but I never was in and leading in a small district. And so I'd be interested in your take on, does it change? Is it different?
Great question. First of all, would you please tell people the website for your company?
My company is APC Leadership Collaborative, and our website is apccollab.com. Yeah, I've had plenty of experience in tiny districts, one schoolhouse districts. My favorite is always the story of the superintendent who also mowed the lawn at the school.
Yes, I'm familiar with those superintendents because while I was a large system, all of my neighbors were much smaller systems. And sometimes when we would meet for lunch periodically, I loved it. I valued it because they were doing just tremendous work as leaders of smaller districts because they were responsible for everything. And one of them would have said, I'm going to be late. I'm driving the bus this morning. Or I'm going to be late. I'm fixing the cooler so that we can serve lunch. You're just like, what? Yeah, it's remarkable. And I stood in awe of them, no doubt. One of the things I would say, though, is that it shouldn't be that different from small, medium, and large in terms of system thinking. What I will say, though, is you can get away with a lot more in a smaller system if you primarily lead through relationship. Now, when it comes to the habits of systems thinking, then there's no difference. You have to be thinking about the unintended consequences of a decision. You have to be thinking about testing your own assumptions, or you're using your own past experiences to help guide your next steps. You have to be thinking of cause and effect and all those kinds of things when it comes to balancing loops and reinforcing loops. So I would say that there's no real difference other than you can get away with a lot more just based on relationship.
Can I make a quick connection before we jump in?
Absolutely.
We just had this conversation with another organization about our rebrand process that we went through as my own organization. And we were laughing about how hard it was to pick colors or to deal with the logo and what should the logo look like and all these things and how long that took. And then I realized that because we are a 3-person organization, that one vote is 33% of the vote. And of course it took long, because it wasn't a quick thing. Now, because the majority part was really hard to do and also easy at the same time. So, meaning the smallness makes for longer and faster situations. I know how my colleagues will respond, but when we aren't aligned, it could take longer to get to
That's
a decision.
interesting. Yeah, a small district, it can be nimble and can make sweeping changes very quickly.
Yes.
However, if they don't apply the system thinking of what are the unintended consequences or the short-term or long-term consequences of this decision, they may be spending a lot more time digging out of that decision.
We are constantly having we can have easy repair conversations because there's only 3 of us, which is the digging part, but it takes a while.
Yeah.
It takes a while.
Makes sense.
Anyway, really interesting. Let's listen to her, see what she has to say.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Today on An Imperfect Leader, Dr. Jennifer Lowery is my guest. Jennifer is the Superintendent of Schools for the T Area School District in T, South Dakota. Formed in July of 2003 and graduating just 11 students in that first year, T Area Schools is now celebrating its 20th year. It has over 2,000 students. It's one of the fastest growing districts in the state, and I'm so thrilled to have her here. Jen, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So, Jen, I read a piece that you wrote about your school district in T, and you wrote, and we'll get to the question in a moment, but this is what you wrote. This is the question I ask myself, my administrative team, and most importantly, the people working closest with our students. During my tenure as superintendent of the 2,000 student T area school district in South Dakota, our moral compass has been defined by this simple question. And so that question is
it good enough for my own 3 children? More importantly, is it good enough for your children, for grandchildren?
And then you gave an example of how this question came to the forefront. It had to do with the state's adoption of a teacher effectiveness model. And I wonder, would you take a moment to tell us about this experience and how that question prompted you to consider the approach that your district was going to take?
I should put that in quotes because I listen to a lot of Audible to stay well-read. And Simon Sinek talks about starting with why. So if we're going to roll out a state initiative, we should start with why. And so I wanted to we were going to adopt student learning objectives, and that was state compliance. But we needed to move that from compliance to improvement and start with the why and start with the heart of the issue. So every year I have a great opportunity to address my entire staff. And how we addressed this topic is that I asked everybody in the district who had a child or grandchild in our schools to stand up. And then I said, so the compliance issue is that we need 80% of 70% to be proficient. And then I said, if we have 100 people and we take 80%, and I asked some people to sit down. And I sat down myself because at that time I had a kindergartner starting as well. And I asked them, was it okay to sit down and not take into consideration those kids, because it really hurt my heart to consider that I was sitting down for my own son. And that's how we started with why. And that's how we started with that question. very early on. And it's just been this core that people know I'm going to ask, because let's stand up for every child, because I won't sit down for my own, and they don't want to sit down for their own either.
You bring up Simon Sinek, and he has obviously impacted so many of us in the field with that core question about knowing your why and working towards it. And what you're describing in so many ways is the difference between school reform and school transformation. Reform is all about compliance, and coaching is about compliance and keeping just a high pressure on compliance. And what you're really speaking to is transformation, but being clear on why you're doing it. So it's really that collective aspiration. What do we want to create together? How do we want to be together? And then we'll move forward towards what we need to do. It's really impressive. In the leadership model that I use to advise others, there is a dimension called leaders learning work, which is the mind of an organization's work. And it includes many things like serving as the lead learner, meaning that you are a vulnerable leader who admits when you make mistakes. And it also includes in that dimension a term, applying design and systems thinking. And when I learned about you, it was at a session where you were participating in a panel with two other colleagues presented by Studer Education. And during that panel discussion, there was a statement made, and I wrote it down in my notebook. Stop isolated initiatives and align execution for real impact. That's just screaming design and systems thinking. So would you describe the progress that you have been making to build enduring systems, and why you start with culture?
So we'll get to this, but I'm imperfect and not an expert by any means in system thinking, but I'm getting much, much better at it. And I think that's part of this work that you're talking about, is saying, I don't have to be perfect in order to move forward. And when I think of why we started with culture first, is we partnered with Studer Education. And one of the first pieces we did was an employee engagement survey. And when we did the employee engagement surveys, I got some feedback that hurt a little bit. Actually, I just opened up my employee engagement survey results and still get some stingers in there. But how do we react after we put our guard down? And so in that survey, it said that the recognition being given was not authentic, and it felt like it wasn't genuine. So in the system that was happening, I was spending hours on providing that, what I thought was positive feedback. It was taking a lot of time. That was much in the wee hours of the night when you're the only one awake. And I'm like, okay, I need to have a deep pause and say, how do we need to develop that system better, eliminate hassle, and make it genuine? And what we did, and through our partnership, is we asked people who are the most outstanding people who work in our organization. And those individuals, are about 20 of them, including 2 board members. We put together our standards of excellence based on qualitative feedback from everyone in the organization. So then we could say, what were we going to celebrate, and what was the definition of those? And
so if I can interject for just 1 second. So it sounds like what you had to reconsider, and the approach that you took, was an appreciative inquiry lens, as opposed to what Jenn thinks that people will feel good about getting feedback on. So it wasn't what is important to you, but rather what is important to all of us. I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, but an appreciative inquiry lens looks at what does the organization value as opposed to what does one person value. And similarly, I remember going to a conference, and so the leader of this presentation talked about how he gave everybody a little airplane saying that you lift us up kind of thing. And I went, oh, that's great. I'm going to do something very similar. And we're going to almost mob people's areas and say, you make us better, you lift us up. Similarly, though, what I didn't do was take a step back, as you have, and say, of the people identified as lifting us up, why do you stay? As opposed to why are people leaving? Why do you stay? What is it that makes us special? And then determining how we're going to honor people through that lens as opposed to some other. Does that sort of resonate with what you were seeing in terms of the feedback you were getting and then the approach that you took?
Absolutely. It's not my lens, it's our lens. And how do you create a we? How do you create the team and slow down enough to do that? And then they, meaning the full team, we set up a system that acknowledged what looked like and they submitted it. And we celebrate everything that the peers in the district celebrate what looks like because we've defined what looks like.
Does that team change ever now that you've added more people that you're celebrating? Or is it still a core group, or it was that group that created the core tenets of what gets celebrated in your district?
That team created the core tenets, and now the large team of the entire district says, I just saw this person do that, and submits it via a Google document. And we have a system that celebrates that across our multimedia platforms, internally, then externally, and then have awards on it. And we end the entire year. The last thing we do as a team is we've already announced the Teacher of the Year. We announced the Standards of Excellence Employee of the Year. And we bring a fresh team together through nominations to select and give that person a standing ovation as we end the school year.
That's really special. Jenn, I'd like to ask you a question that I ask every guest who comes on the podcast, and I will add, because during your panel discussion, I heard the phrase, better, not perfect. So I sense you have an opinion on the term imperfect. You mentioned it a moment ago. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
It resonates because perfection gets in the way of progress. It paralyzes people. Early on, it paralyzed my teams. And we just talked about what we might do. But if we didn't have it all perfect, we didn't move it to the next step. And just like with the culture, if you don't go to the people closest to the work and see what they really think about it, you got to move forward and get their feedback and adjust in real time. Don't wait for it to be perfect or you will be paralyzed.
Hello, everybody. My name is Zach Taylor. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Transforming Education.
And I'm Peter Stiepelman, the host of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. And listen, we call it An Imperfect Leader because one of the things that we do know in leadership is that we get into these positions and then there's this expectation that we're going to be perfect. And that's just not the case. And what we're seeking all the time is an opportunity to come together with others who are doing very similar work and learn from each other, share our stories, share our successes, and also try to figure out how to solve some of our problems. And so Zach and I have created Talk Soup, is what we're affectionately calling it, SUPT, right? In terms of superintendents coming together, learning together, and also having fun together. Zach, what else would you add?
I just say that in my work with school leaders that I've seen almost a kind of loneliness at the top of the system. And the fact that oftentimes leaders feel lonely, it's a lonely place. And this is an opportunity to come, to even commiserate a little bit, but also to have a reflective practice, to find solutions and to come together with people who understand, maybe the only people that really understand what you're going through, and to find those solutions, to find ways to feel encouraged, to move forward day to day, month to month as we meet.
If you'd like to learn more, come over to our website, imperfectleader.com, and sign up. We'd love to spend time with you.
We look forward to seeing you.
Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. Dr. Jennifer Lowery is my guest. Jen is the superintendent of the T Area School District in T, South Dakota. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then we discuss it. Jen, what happened?
I've been the superintendent for 11 years, as you mentioned at the beginning. And in my first year, I was asked to be the interim. And I guess I'm still the interim after 11 years. We needed to pass a bond issue. We had third graders who were in stick buildings connected by a wood walkway. The buildings did not have running water. The buildings did not have toilets, obviously. And we were coming in and out, wasting how much instructional time. And we either had to build more of those, or we needed to create a strategic plan for how we were going to grow as our community grew. It was going to happen despite us, no matter what happened. So I needed to run a bond issue, and I didn't have time, or I didn't take time to develop a story with the community that was their story and their solution instead of my quick solution. And we were very close multiple times, but it took 5 bonds before we got our first project through.
So just to recap, you are the interim superintendent. You've been hired, and I'm assuming that the board recognized the growth that was happening and said, you've got to partner with us and we've got to move forward with this bond. And you have an elementary school that has outgrown itself. You have students who are going to need space, and you're looking down the road saying, we're going to find ourselves growing not just incrementally, but significantly over the next few years. So you go to your community, and initially they say no. Actually, they say no up until the 5th time. As you look back on this, what got overlooked?
Having a strategic plan that is built with a community and the board, and writing that story together is what was missing.
And as you look back and think about the relationships that were built, or what did you learn about relationships through this process?
It comes back to being not so focused on perfect. When I was trying to pass the bond, and you'll notice I said I instead of we, when I was trying to pass the bond, I was focused on the people who were at a no and convinced I could get them to move. If you follow our district, I've passed 2 more bonds. We passed just recently at an 85% level, a 41 million addition to our high school.
And for the listeners, I watched the video on her website. It is really clear why they need the space. Not that I'm trying to convince anyone to vote. They've already voted 85% in favor. But it's so impressive to see why, families move to a community when they believe in what is happening there, right? Businesses will relocate, businesses will stay, families will relocate. It's clear what you're doing in your district is a real beacon of hope, a beacon of promise, but it also presents itself with real challenges because you need space.
So the videos are part of the solution that brought the community together. We had 3 public meetings with extremely low attendance, but I learned from those 3 public meetings, and then I tried to do a Zoom meeting where I took live questions and had very low attendance. So we took all of the questions received and we created video segments so that people who were supporters answered others' questions by providing them the video link and told them what minute to watch. In the absence of information, people will make up information. So on all the social media things that occur, the answers of the supporters, why don't you watch the video? Here's the link. we created the story of the why and the what and why we needed it and how we were going to do it through video, and empowered the people of the community to use the information how they wanted to use it. There was a yes committee who asked for those videos to be created and then distributed them everywhere to answer questions and take away the unknown, fear-mongering, and they moved the middle. They didn't worry about the no's, they moved the middle.
So for those who are aspiring to be superintendents, or my mother who doesn't fully understand bond campaigns, superintendents can't tell people to vote yes. The district can't tell people to vote yes. They can only create informational videos and things like that. And a separate committee may form, independent of the school district, to say, we want this, and so vote yes. And so it sounds like, from how you've been describing this from the very beginning, you started with I, didn't go so well. You recognize pretty quickly it is a we tell our story. And then when it comes to relationships, we recognize that, at least in the district that I led, that 90% of the community got their information from friends and neighbors. And so when you start a we campaign, we want this, and friends and neighbors are able to point to informational clips that you have created that can be shared, that begins to create this groundswell of support, as opposed to trying to focus energies towards an unorganized or organized opposition. Does that seem to resonate with how strategy and strategic planning shifted in your situation?
Exactly.
What frustrated you?
That this was about kids and not about money. And I learned that people take care of their kids no matter what. But money is important because that's how they take care of their kids and their family. And it was frustrating that it took time when there was an urgent need. And that was a difficult time to go through. But I'm better because of it.
It's so hard for any of us who have been superintendents to go through those types of experience. The first thing you said was, this was not about money, it was about our children and what they needed. And before that, you mentioned that individuals will write their own narratives in the absence of good information. And it sounds like, unfortunately, you had to experience that to get to where you are. Nobody wants to have to go through that. I imagine, though, as the pandemic hit, all that you had learned in terms of communicating and working with your team and being there and clear with your community and building a coalition, I bet you that past experience helped you navigate a really troubling time for a school district.
Tremendously. The overwhelming support we had during the pandemic would have been envied by many of my colleagues. We took the same approach. We created a community committee that met and developed what our processes and solutions would be. Then we brought those to the board, and we did nightly check-ins with everyone with an update that I promised would occur before I left to go. And they clung to that. They clung to that information, and they clung that their neighbors, while they might not have liked the decision of that impact committee, they respected that they were doing the very best they could from multiple angles to move us forward. The superintendent didn't have the solution. The community team had the solution.
That's so powerful. When I think about even my role during the pandemic, so much of the frustration that was coming was directed at a singular position. I tried really hard not to take it personally. People were scared. They were anxious for their children. As you noted, they will spend any amount of money and attention on their child. And when things are not going as they had hoped, or they're seeing their child struggle at home, they will direct their fear, which sometimes manifests in anger and people revealing not their very best selves. But when you have a committee made up of your community helping guide those discussions and decisions, gosh, I'm going through my own sort of after-action review, so thanks, Jen. That really probably would have been a nice step. In the end, what was something that was good that came out of this situation?
My approach to leadership evolved and shifted. To this day, I get frustrated that we can't just move forward because I can see it clear as day. It doesn't matter if I can see it clear as day. It matters if the team and the community can write the picture and feel as though they're writing the picture authentically with me, not in spite of me and not because of me.
You have been doing this now 11 years in your community, and it is still, I feel similarly, that we have to remind ourselves that leadership is about we and framing a situation and working. I guess I would put it this way. Sometimes people will say, I'm right behind you. And then you look back and you're like, how far behind? And what you're describing more is linking arm in arm and walking together. And you described earlier about a standing ovation for an employee who demonstrates and has shown the values of the district in every way that they behave or do their job. And it sounds that's a metaphor for how you lead. We are all in this together. And I will get to that in a moment because it's something that I thought about when I saw that on your website, it says, together we are writing our legacy. So this conversation that we're having, and you're talking about the scripts that we write, the work that we do, the framing that is done, truly is deep to your core of what we do together. I'm curious, though, in the end, because this podcast is designed to help aspiring and early in their career superintendents and even established leaders to learn from the experience of other leaders. And so with that in mind, what advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
The first piece is to remember that leaders must go first. Progress over perfection. And identify what your moral compass question is. You're going to be hit with extremely difficult decisions that won't be popular. But in order to be able to sleep at night, you have to have a question. And we started the podcast with mine. Is this what I want for my 3 children? Because if it is, then it's what I want for my 2,300 children. And if it isn't, then that's not okay. And we got to go to the drawing board again. One of the processes I did is I have a purpose statement and I have it in my office. I became superintendent at 29. I got my doctorate by the time I was 32. And I was like, now what am I going to do? So I wrote my purpose and I try to live that. My question, my moral question, and my purpose. And that's why I said yes to this person. I have no idea who you are other than an email that said, hey, I saw you at Essay. Let's connect. How do I pay it forward? How do I help somebody else? And live those out.
My guest again was Dr. Jennifer Lowery. I'm glad and grateful that you said yes to the invitation and did say, okay, this guy saw me at ASA, so that's nice, but be well. It is about paying it forward. And when I saw a message that you wrote to families on your website, it concluded with, together we are writing our legacy. And it is really clear from what I've read about you, including what I read, and as I mentioned that I watched your high school expansion project videos. And this conversation today, that when you say our, you really mean the entire community, the school community, the community at large, that everyone is writing that legacy. And I have to believe, based on our conversation today and what I've seen, that is such a bright legacy. I'm really confident of that. So really, thank you so much for being my guest.
I'm so glad to be here. Have a great day.
We are back, Jamie. We are back.
Nice. Yeah. My favorite. Can I tell you my favorite part of the whole interview?
Yeah.
Can you guess what my favorite part of the whole interview was? It's about you. It's about you.
Oh.
There's a comment she made. Oh, okay.
No, I don't know.
The doctor, when she said, I don't know you from anything.
Oh, yeah. I know.
That moment.
To me,
I was like,
she was so real. She was just real. Yeah.
I just thought, I was like, oh, this is so good. And so good for the listeners to know, I'm going to be blunt, listeners. Peter reaches out to people and says, hey, would you like to be on this podcast? I was inspired by you. And they're like, who are you?
I know. Sometimes it's a friend of a friend.
And
those lend me some credibility. And in this case, I heard Jenn speak at a conference and was just so moved by the work that she was doing. Particularly around the systems piece, because I was like, oh, this was at a time where I really wanted to really talk more about systems thinking. That was the season of systems thinking, really. So it may have even been first season, because I had the Water Center as a sponsor, and their work is so important. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's so funny. I don't know you from anybody. Yeah.
She's like, I don't know you from anyone.
I know.
I got this email out of the blue.
Yes, I know.
All right. That was my favorite part. My second, or at least 1B, is her moral question. And I have a moral question. I know my moral question. I've shared it with you before. I've shared it with the listeners before. My moral question is public school truly public? Like, does it serve every student? Thus the definition of public.
That's interesting. I would expand that to also include, does it actually also include the public's perspective on things? She talked about, for example, that she had to shift from I to we in leadership, or that's an important piece of leadership.
Yeah.
And that true leadership involves empowering the community to write the picture and find solutions. And I can tell you that sometimes we get into leadership, superintendents get into leadership, and they're like, I was selected by the board, who was selected by the community, so I feel like I have a mandate to lead. And sometimes we forget that it's the public's schools. And so then we have to ask ourselves whether or not the values we bring align to the values of the community. And they don't always line up. And so that's what sometimes causes tension.
But my moral question still stands in that I'm driven as a leader by the promise of a public education.
Yes.
And it is something that I believe in so deeply. It's a core part of my being.
Yes.
And so I wondered, what's yours? What's your moral question that guides you? Do you have one? I know you have morals that guide you. I'm not indicating that. But
No. Yeah.
She really synthesized it into a singular question. I wondered if you had one.
I did it. This, I believe, similar to, you used to hear them a lot on NPR, this I believe statement. And I wrote one once because for that very question of what is it that I believe? So not just what are my values, but then what do I believe in terms of for education? And for me, mine doesn't come to whether or not public schools are for the public. I do think it's a promise that we make. It's a contract that we make to say these schools are for you. I go a little bit in the direction of, I believe that it's experiences, by providing those experiences, whether it be extracurricular, co-curricular, or opportunities and pathways, so that children actually can not just be, I guess you can't aspire unless you are inspired. And so how do we make sure that your socioeconomic status doesn't limit your ability to access the arts or athletics or all those kind of things? So this, I believe, is anchored in Richard Rothstein's work on that it's opportunity gaps that are what are limiting kids and their opportunities to really thrive. And so how do we close those? So eliminating things like pay for play as best as we can, that it ought not to be that you're the child of the superintendent, that you get to participate in things, and your parent who's working 2 jobs, no insurance benefits, just struggling to make it work. Their child would never ask their parent, can I fill out this form to pay $40 a month for a saxophone or a clarinet or whatever? So I would say that to me is there's such a chasm between rich and poor, and it's only getting bigger. And so my belief is that the public schools have to be the thing that bridges that gap. And so then you look at people like Robert Putnam's book, whether it's Bowling Alone or Our Kids, and say it's our responsibility, and the public schools shouldn't be the only ones who are responsible for it, but they're a pretty darn great place to start of bridging that chasm.
Fascinating. I love this conversation. I love that reflection of what are the systems that we currently have in our country that bridge the chasm. There aren't many, and public ed is likely number one. Likely. I'm trying to think of others that might be there, but there are a few others. But it's really powerful to consider that as if those are to be diminished or go away, there won't be a way to bridge the gap.
Agree.
Powerful.
Totally agree. Yeah, we say in systems thinking that a system structure, and you and I have talked about what does that mean by structure, creates its behaviors. And so when we see these behaviors of wanting to dismantle public education or make it more difficult for someone to access all the kinds of things that every child, every adult, but every child should have access to, then we say, okay, so then what's happening in the system that's allowing those things to happen? And we're seeing it day in and day out. So this is an odd conversation to end this season. And yet at the same time, I'm super excited about what's coming next. And those people that you're going to meet in the next season who do remarkable things, who really push us and inspire us to want to reclaim the narrative on schools and to also really just double down on the importance of public education.
Yeah. Our conversation, or at least I think we're skirting or alluding to the current context that we're living in terms of the difficulty with bridging the chasm. But
yep. So she says, is it good enough for my own 3 children? And if it's not, then we're not going to do it. So I would say the same thing for me as we make decisions in our spaces, and to encourage those who are in leadership right now to be thinking about how they make decisions, why they make decisions. And then I loved her line about progress over perfection and identity about what that. Let's not focus on like perfection. Let's do progress over perfection.
Well, she talking about being paralyzed by perfection. I think that happens to, at least it happens to me.
Yeah.
She talked about, one thing I thought was really interesting was that she talked about the impact the employee engagement survey had on her and why it drove her to create this committee of excellence, which I thought was really fascinating. I want to get to that. But I wondered what your experience has been as a superintendent with an employee engagement survey like that. And then I wondered even more interestingly, I wonder what, if I gave my family a family engagement survey, what would the feedback look like from my family? Like, I'd be so interested.
I will tell you, when I was a principal, and then certainly in central office, we did 360s, and I would publish it for everybody to see. This is what people are saying. And here are my, and obviously when you first read, you somewhat defensive, they don't understand, or the question is not clear or whatever. And then when you really sit down with it, first, you don't perseverate over the negative because there's so much more positive than negative, and all of us always struggle with that. And then you share, here are the findings, and here's what I clearly need to work on. And I'm going to be leaning on whether it's a brain trust or a group to say, I'd like to explore some ways to get better, right? Because otherwise you do the survey again, you get the same results because you didn't actually engage people to find out what was I doing that created that kind of feedback. Not that it's terribly negative. It's just, you want to do better.
I really relate to, as a facilitator and coach, I share the feedback back every time. So after every session, if we're coming back to another session, which is often true, majority of the time we're coming back, the next session, we share, here's what you said in the last session. Here's how we've changed as a result. Here's how we've tried to adapt this session based on the feedback that you gave us. I particularly love, and that's the constructive part, I particularly love, because people are people, when the feedback is contradictory. Like, when you get one that says, I would never do that exercise again. Another person that says, best thing I've ever done.
And then in that case, it probably is helpful when you say, hey, look, we're getting conflicting information here. So looks like we're going to do a little bit of this. We're going to do a little bit of that as a way to
share it, because this, to your point, it's a we exercise that we're in, not an I exercise. And so it may not resonate for you, but there are other people around you.
Yes. And you hope that by doing that, it models for them that it can appear to be scary. It is such an important piece of being in community together.
Yes. And I am not a bad person because I'm made a facilitation mistake or a coaching mistake or a leadership mistake. This is why I actually really loved her exercise, her adaptation to trying to figure out how to go from I to we, in that she went looking for excellence in her organization. And she pulled the 20, what does she call it? She says, how do we need to develop that system better to eliminate hassle and make it genuine? And what we did through our partnership with people is we asked them, who are the most outstanding people who work in our organization? And the organization named 20 people. And the 20 people became her committee that helped guide decision-making and the tenets in which they would make decisions. The identifying 20 amazing people, 20 outstanding people, doesn't make anybody else in the system not amazing. They are also amazing. The difference between me, 22-year-old teacher, and my colleague, 40-year-old teacher, 45-year-old teacher, is skill. We're both wonderful people, but she's better. She's better than me. And you put better than me, I get to partner with better than me, I get better.
Yeah.
I get better.
I love that. That's very nice.
Yeah. But it takes humility. It takes a lot of humility.
It sure does. Yeah. I appreciate the question. I'll have to think about what my own family would say. That survey I probably wouldn't give to them. So anyhow.
I thought of you.
Maybe not.
I thought of you. Yeah. Definitely. That's a good example of it. Let's give it on a positive week on an upswing.
Yeah. Don't ever give the survey in February. No one's happy in February.
But back to the small organization, like, wow, 25% of my family thinks I'm doing a terrible job.
I know. That's true. That's another big difference between small, medium, and large systems. Wow. All right, listen.
That's funny. Yeah.
You got to go.
Yeah.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Elenson.
And we will see you next week. And we also hope that you'll give us 5 stars and make a little notice, maybe a little recommendation. Or in that recommendation, you talk about things like, what is your moral focus? Like, why do you do the work that you do? Or what would be the qualities of the top 20 that you would pick? So you can choose.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Take care.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruba doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.